Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the month of the beast on What Magic Is This Podcast, a podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the supernatural, the paranormal, and the weird. My name is Douglas Batchelor, and let's jump right in, shall we? We have an amazing show. I'm going to start with a bit of confession with this episode. I love reading about Aleister Crowley. I love reading biographies of him. I've probably read over 20 biographies of the man. Anytime that there's a new biography released, I rush out and I buy it. I've also read a ton of what people think about Aleister Crowley and his theories as to what Crowley was thinking or what he was trying to say when he said this and whatnot. Usually, most of these tend to read the same. Crowley did this, Crowley said that, etc., etc. And then, earlier in the year, I came across a book unlike anything I had ever read about Aleister Crowley. The book, Liber el Vel Bogus, The Real Confessions of Aleister Crowley. The author has perhaps the most unique perspective on both Aleister Crowley as well as Thelema and the new Aeon that I have ever come across. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Mr. Richard T. Cole. Richard, how are you?
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. All the better for hearing that introduction.
Wonderful. I had to have you on the show after reading this book, Richard. It's a wonderful one, and I'd like for you to elucidate as much as you can about just how you've come to some of your conclusions and how it all transpired, as well as what you think about Thelema and Aleister Crowley. So let me just ask this one. When did you first come across Crowley in your life?
Grandparents, big Crowley fans.
Your grandparents were Crowley fans?
Grandparents, big Crowley fans, yeah.
Huh. How did that work? Did they tell you stories about the Great Beast? Did they sit you down on the couch and talk about
No. I mean, it wasn't as though they did kind of Gnostic Mass after Sunday dinner.
Okay.
I think my grandfather was a Freemason, so he appreciated Crowley from the kind of esoteric rituals, the Egyptian stuff. My grandmother was natural clairvoyant, maybe sensitive, I guess you'd call them today. And she really saw Crowley as literally as a force of nature.
Got it.
That happened to say things. And she was always convinced, she used to say, oh, one day he'll be on everybody's lips. And I still remember that from being, a real small child. And so, yeah, my grandparents kind of, he was always there in the house. I mean, not obsessive, but his influence was obviously quite clear. And it was my grandparents who took me actually to see the old villa place that had been kicked out of, the Thelema Abbey, which was essentially, I wrote a book some years ago now about their experience of going back there after 50 years. So, yeah, my grandparents really were responsible for the initial infestation, I guess.
Infestation. I like the terminology. Did you rush out to read his books when you were younger?
Well, there wasn't that much about. I mean, back then, other than the kind of original first editions. I mean, you didn't really start to get anything out until The Great Beast, perhaps, by Simmons. That was, 51?
Mm-hmm.
And so there wasn't a great deal available there. It was, like I say, it was just a very peripheral character.
Okay. What spurred you on to want to know more about Crowley, though?
The guy was utterly fascinating, wasn't he?
He was.
I think more than anything, for various reasons, I got very interested in the supernatural from a very early age. And as I kind of got older, my interest wasn't so much as do ghosts exist, does the paranormal exist. I knew these things existed because I'd been not subject to it, but I'd experienced things that were clearly way beyond what someone could anticipate. So I kind of went at it with it exists. What is it? Well, how does it work? And every time I came back to Crowley, I mean, this is going through life, You could feel the heat from his work, but it was always a heat you couldn't get at, and that was frustrating because there was a tremendous sense, not specifically in what he wrote, because that was always ultimately disappointed because it didn't get you at the fire. You could feel that heat, and you wanted more, and that's why I kept persevering with him, because I just felt he was onto something big that just got lost in translation somewhere along the line.
Got it. So was your initial perceptions of Crowley, were they positive?
I think from an early age, I kind of saw him more like Sinbad, maybe, Dan Dare, pirate, a kind of character that was loosely based on reality, but which had been fantasized beyond any resemblance of actuality. And that's how I saw him. I'd never really took him that seriously because of the kind of almost pantomime cloak that I'd put on him since I was a kid.
Was there a point which flipped a switch for you with your perception of Aleister Crowley?
Yes, it was in the afternoon. I've even written this down so I wouldn't forget. Friday, the 21st of June, 2013. I was walking my partner's dog just across the heath. And we got caught in a summer storm, I guess. And while we were there, kind of hanging around under the tree, something happened. It was only a very minor incident that happened. But as I kind of tried to clear my senses, I saw the dog run away into the bushes 20, 30 yards away. And I thought, in my kind of overreaction, I'd let it off its lead and it had done a runner.
Right.
And of course I panicked because it's like my partner's, it's her kid, her child. And I just remember thinking, fuck, I'm gonna have to get this dog back. I'm really in trouble here. And then at that moment, something by my right hand tugged, and it was my partner's new pet. The one I'd actually seen had died, I think, 6-7 months earlier, and I'd actually seen the ghost of her old dog. And it was like at that moment a light bulb went on in my head, and I just suddenly got something. I understood it that I've been striving after all of my life. And at that moment, everything Crowley said suddenly just clicked into place.
Right.
And it total once in a lifetime moment of absolute clarity.
Interesting. Huh. How would you describe the Great Beast's personality from I mean, I guess if Crowley was always like a pantomime figure or just a figure that has always been in your life, almost on the periphery all the time, how would you describe the Great Beast? What's your version of Aleister Crowley that you see?
As a man?
As a man, yeah.
In this case, I shall defer to something Colin Wilson said.
By all means.
The great author.
I love him.
Great person, right? He was discussing the absolute perils of quitting the Abramelin operation.
Right.
The terrible demons that were going to possess you forever, eat bits of you slowly.
Right.
And he said that Crowley was such a bastard. He was fucking immune. And I don't think you'll get a better definition of Crowley than that. The kind of wickedest demons in the 7th level of hell just bounced off him.
That's right.
Perhaps another one I could offer, which I think, without saying specifics, I always found this very, very chilling. I asked someone who knew him quite well, what was it like to actually know him, as somebody that could come round to your house. And he thought about it for a second or two, and he said, just be thankful you did not know him personally. And I thought, whoa, that I felt the coldness from that chill the room. It's like, forget poltergeist. That was Crowley as a man. I do not think there are words that can adequately describe just how far out that guy was. So yeah, not as a man, he was terrible, horrible, nasty. It's like Keith Moon living next door, perhaps.
From what I've heard, Keith Moon almost had nothing on Crowley at certain points of his life.
Right.
As somebody who reads a lot of Crowley biographies like I have, there's an event that you talk about in your book. It is written about in a lot of the biographies, but very few people seem to draw much attention to it. So could you elucidate a little bit more on what went on with a young Aleister Crowley and his experiments with gunpowder?
Right. Can't remember how old he was. Quite young.
He was young. He was young.
He was young. I can't remember. I would say, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, maybe that kind of age, maybe a little bit older. But anyway, decided he was going to make some fireworks. And Crowley being Crowley, he didn't want like a firework that sparkled a bit and went poot. He wanted kind of Chernobyl. So he gets a glass and fills it with 2 pounds of gunpowder, plus the kind of various flary bits. Okay, stuck it in the ground and lit it. And according to his kind of account, it went off literally before he could come away. And every other biography I've ever read, and like yourself, I've read a few of them, they kind of mention this incident as though it was kind of like, oh yeah, fell over, scraped his knee. But if you think about this, 2 pounds of gunpowder is 907 grams. 907 grams of gunpowder. As a comparison, there are only about 50 grams in a shotgun cartridge and less than a gram in a standard kind of firework that you would buy. Yeah. And that went off point blank. Crowley says in his confessions he had 4,000 bits of glass removed from his head and spent 96 hours in a coma. Yeah. And that has got to do some damage. And there's a growing body of evidence to suggest that there are 3 kind of key indicators that make sort of a serial killer. And a guy called Dr. Pincus, I think his name is. And he says what you need mental illness to start with. You need physical abuse, and you need blunt force trauma to your frontal lobe. And that is exactly what Crowley got. 2 pounds worth. Point blank. Turn me into a psycho, please.
Yeah, when I read that in your book, it was like, that's really interesting that not enough people are actually talking about this. It seems like a very important thing to happen to especially a young person, right? Like, as far as I understand, yeah, the blunt force trauma, head injuries for people that we could deem sociopaths and whatnot are I'm not going to say unanimous, but it's a thing that happens to a lot of people that we would call sociopaths or psychopaths. Very interesting information. I want to talk about your book a little bit, Richard. What is the overall thesis of Liber L Vel Bogus?
Whoa.
It's a question.
That's quite a question. I guess when I started it, my intention was to collect all of those known anomalies that everybody chuckles about in the quiet corners. Oh, it's like, I'm not sure about that bit. And it's like, let's pass quietly over that bit. And I thought, right, okay, while they're fluttering about in the playground, you can ignore them. I thought, let's dump the whole fucking lot right in front of people and say, right, explain that and stay fashionable. Right. And of course, as I delved into the known anomalies and discrepancies, each time you looked at one, it opened up a backstory of half a dozen others. And it didn't take long, really, to establish that the reception and the whole mythology as presented by Crowley and as propagated today is demonstrably a myth. Simple as that. But in kicking down the myth, Crowley left enough evidence of an entirely different story, which has been absolutely suppressed from the record, literally from the word go, chiefly by Crowley, because he changed the fundamental nature of the kind of revelation he was preaching. And by following that alternate kind of chronology, I formed a very definite impression, understanding of what he was trying to say with his triune system.
We're going to get into a few of the anomalies here that you have in this book, but I just want to remind people when we're talking about the reception of the Book of the Law, that is, just like in the last episode, the story goes that Aleister Crowley was in Cairo on honeymoon with his wife Rose. His wife said that an entity wanted to talk to Crowley. Crowley said, I want to test who this is. He took her to a museum called the Bulak in Cairo, got her to say, show me who's talking to you. She pointed at a picture of Horus that was on a stele that said 666. And of course, Crowley was like, hey, that's the number of the beast. And so from this, Aleister Crowley said that he received a Book of the Law over 3 days. I believe it was in April in 1904. Over those 3 days, he was talked to by an entity that he could not see that was behind him. And he wrote the Book of the Law, which would be almost in a way the most important document to the idea of his magical philosophy, which is the Lema. Anyways, I have to ask, Richard, the way in which you take apart this myth, as you call it, is quite stunning. So I'd like to go through a few of these things, if you can. The Bulak Museum, not what it appears to be.
In his writings, on the subject, Crowley refers to the Bulak Museum on 6 occasions. Only once, when he's copying notes from someone else, probably the person who translated provided the French translation of the stelae hieroglyphics. Only on that occasion, when he's copying his notes, does Crowley actually refer to the correct museum. There's no doubt in my mind at all that Crowley went to the Bulak Museum, because it simply was not there. All the stuff was being moved to the Egyptian Museum, which is what Crowley actually describes. And my feeling is, tell you what, here, let's go right to the horse's mouth here.
Sure.
Let's go back to Crowley's contemporary notebooks. Of the time. He's there in Cairo, honeymoon everywhere. Okay, let's see what Crowley says about the visit to the Bulak Museum. Bearing in mind its significance,
right?
Nothing. Just not mentioned. So does he mention Rose finding the stelae, going, oh yeah, that's Horus, look, there's your mate there? Not a chance. Not mentioned. Now, this is something that I have not yet got anybody in the Crowley corner to provide any kind of answer for. They just don't seem to want to talk about the fact that the big deal, the 3-day reception with AWAS, do you remember? And, it's like, I'll write this down, mate, quick. Never mentioned in his private diaries. Never mentioned. The Bulak Museum trip is something that Crowley writes in when he's compelled to change his original story under pressure from a guy called Jones, who's his occult senior in the kind of order that they're trying to form. The Bulak Museum simply, it didn't happen. None of that happened, as is not recorded anywhere in Crowley's diaries. And I mean, if you've read Confessions, you'll read the sheer number of times when Crowley says, I had a perfect time to discuss that with so-and-so, forgot. And then so-and-so, forgot. And then Captain Fuller put out A Star in the West. I never mentioned it. It's like, well, I'm sorry, but I'm not falling for this.
Was the Bulak Museum even a museum in 1904?
No, it had closed. I think it closed in 1889, and then it moved to another one whose name escapes me. And then in 1902, that closed down and everything moved to the Egyptian Museum, which opened, I think, in November 03, I think it opened.
So why would he even say Bulak Museum if it closed 7 years before he was even there?
Okay, right. If you are fabricating a story, okay, and that story is reliant on certain Egyptian documentation, yeah?
Yeah.
If he knows there is a stele there, which is very conveniently labelled 666, that to him is an ace in the hole. Now, Crowley has every right to assume that the Bulak Museum is going to be where the Bulak Museum has been for the last 100 years.
Right.
And it's only by when he's writing his backstory, it's not, oh yeah, Bulak Museum, yeah, there. He's no way of checking. There's no anticipation that the Bulak could have closed. And I feel that is where that discrepancy come from. It is writing from notes, perhaps from an earlier Egypt trip. He certainly never went to the Bulak when he claims it is. He certainly didn't see the stele, and Rose certainly didn't get all they are waiting for you.
Right. I think one of the most interesting parts of your book, Richard, is when you go through the paper that part of the Book of the Law was written on. What is so unusual about this paper?
For some reason, Crowley hated it. He first publishes a facsimile of it in Equinox 1/7, I think it is.
That's his magazine.
The periodical thing. And he publishes it at a ridiculously small size. I mean, I think each page is done at about 1.25 inches. Completely, you just cannot read it. And I don't think, other than the 24 privately circulated Tunis, I think, edition of the book, I don't think we actually get to see a decent facsimile of the manuscript until the Equinox of the Gods, 37. Also, it appears that at some point in the 20s, Crowley took the individual leaves, 65 of them, I think, and he rebacked them with essentially a bit of old curtain. Don't recall him doing that with anything else. It's like, whoa, that's new.
Right.
He wouldn't have done that without bloody good reason. And also, are you married, Douglas?
I'm not. I'm a bachelor in name and in life.
Right. Well, I always imagine Crowley. He's going on his honeymoon and he's drawing up his list of things we must take on honeymoon.
Right.
And I'm wondering what number on the list was ream of typing paper.
Right.
Especially as he almost exclusively used the little vellum notebooks, of which there are dozens, if not hundreds. But this, no, I'm going to use my typing paper. But I think the most kind of damning thing at all is, and there is a very, very interesting anecdote that I've dug up about this.
Okay.
The sting in the tail was the paper that Crowley used, allegedly in April, was it 7th, 8th, and 9th?
I think it's April 8th, 9th, and 10th.
To write the Book of the Law was not commercially available until autumn 1905.
Whoops.
And that, to me, it's like you just can't get round the fact that you're writing with paper that, I mean, you could say, well, AWOS, borrowed Dr. Who's TARDIS, nip back, yeah. And I think at some point, I think the reason Crowley rebacked the pages at Kefaloo when he was working on it, I think he noticed the watermark, because obviously you can only see it if you hold it up to the light. And I think by sticking a blanket on the back, it dampens down the watermark. That was the only thing he could do short of rewriting it. And I think that's why Crowley was so reluctant to reveal a manuscript lest someone see that watermark and think, whoa, wait a minute, I remember the flipping new product flyer about this stuff.
Right.
And you could project that forward and suggest that for whatever reasons, the greatest treasure that the guardians of Crowley's legacy have is that manuscript. it's never been seen, locked in some deep dark dungeon since the alleged Raiders of the Lost Basement miraculous recover, which I can also suggest isn't all it was said. It isn't all it was. Well, let's just say that version isn't quite as literal as certain people would like you to believe. Right. So yeah, we've got this manuscript that no one wants you to have a look at, and that makes me suspicious.
Absolutely. There's some more things to be suspicious about. I'm wondering, Richard, if you can take us through a few of the oddities of things being misplaced, ripped, or scratched out in some of Crowley's relevant documents pertaining to the Book of the Law.
Now, I've kind of gone through a lot of Crowley's kind of unpublished documentation, various things. It's not uncommon for him to cross through passages, insert lines in between, or rework them completely elsewhere. I do not recall another single instance where he has physically ripped 5 and it's almost certainly Crowley did the ripping. I don't think there are any other suspects. And so you have to ask yourself, why? What was so toxic about those 5 pages that they had to go? And the reason, I believe, was because those 5 pages contained Crowley's otherwise missing versification of the stele and its placement in the diary clearly after he'd returned back to Palestine from Cairo. That alone trashes his reception fable, absolutely kills it stone dead in the water there. And that's why they had to go.
So you think Crowley was the one that ripped these out, or you think it was ripped out by somebody later?
Nah. Well, York made a catalogue of Crowley's stuff, I think in 1951, okay. And the pages were certainly indexed as being ripped out then. No, Crowley did it. No one else. No one else. I think in his circle would have dared to kind of vandalise the sort of master's notebooks. Who else would? It had to be Crowley, and it had to be because the stele versifications were just in the wrong place. If you look at the notebook in question, which is, I think it's OS 27, the sequencing, because you would naturally assume that a notebook is written in chronological order. That seems just that it's like, well, how else would you do it?
Right.
But you look at the chronology of various sections of that notebook, and they simply do not fit with the reception mythology that Crowley's trying to weave. They just don't. They just do not fit at all. They make absolutely no sense, in comparison with the kind of Cairo mythology that Crowley's publishing. And again, it's because quite early on he changed his story. And that single change left all the jagged edges that we now see as the kind of discrepancy, because it was quite a fundamental change in the nature of the revelation he was trying to sell Jones into. Didn't work in the end.
There's an instance as well of a date being completely missed, and I'm pretty sure it's Crowley scratched out one of the numbers or made. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, it's not a single instance.
No.
During this pivotal Crowley thelemic broth period, when he's clearly working on it far earlier than he should be.
Right.
When the dating doesn't matter, and obviously you have to go to the unpublished source notebooks to get a glimpse of this kind of dangerous material.
Right.
When the chronology doesn't matter, Crowley quite happily writes the date in, which is, naturally, I did this, yeah. But when he changes his story, all the dating becomes toxic, and he has to start changing 2s to 4s, 4s to 7s. Again, all because of the change that Jones forced. And yeah, the notebooks of that period, it's almost laughable just how Crowley has very, very clumsily attempted to just to smudge the record.
Is there some discrepancies as well that you can let us know about as far as his travel schedule and what was going on there, as far as being in places where maybe he was not?
On the way back, because obviously you've got Crowley's timeline, which basically he published a story that he did the reception thing, which was our 8th, 9th, 10th, whatever, it's somewhere around that. In fact, the first time he published them, he suggested it started on the April the 1st, but he changed that because it's like, well, AWAS won't mind even moving it all forward a bloody week. So according to his story, he did the reception thing, hung around for 2 weeks, and then meandered back to Boleskine. And the problem with that is there's quite a famous occultist called Besant, who must have been on the same boat as Crowley. This is kind of quite a widely known discrepancy, and yet she seems to be on a different boat to Crowley, despite the fact that the two met. Then he gets to Paris to see a writer friend. Oh, bugger, I can't remember his name. Doesn't matter, some French writer. And you look at when he meets this, because Crowley dutifully notes this in his diary, and you think, whoa, did he take Concord back from Egypt? How's he managed that?
Right.
And he returns in an absolutely infeasible time and somehow meets this woman who was on an entirely different ship to him. And that's the kind of discrepancy that's just... It knocks.
Is there any other kind of smoking gun for you that encapsulates that this might all be a myth?
Okay, AWAS dictating the Book of the Law to Crowley. And as Crowley explains, AWAS is going to chuck in bits of the stele vertifications. It's like, whoa, stick that one there, couple there, one at end. Okay, so Crowley's merrily banging away, and under AWAS's dictation, he starts with a verse from the stele. Unfortunately, he gets the wrong verse. They do the first verse early doors, and then a bit later on, Crowley, well, actually, it's not Crowley, is it? It's AWAS. You know, an envoy from the gods forgets they've not done verse 2, and only later, and you can quite clearly see where Crowley's kind of scribbled it in between the lines, you think, whoa, short-term memory loss gods there. Ooh, I'm not sure about that one. And again, that is, come on, you know, this is not a shopping list. This is kind of mankind's new rule book for God knows how many years. It's like you forget verse 2, really?
Busy man.
Busy man. It's like, no, come on, I've only got an hour. And again, you have to look at this 3-hour slots business and think, really? As you start to go deeper in to each facet, the thing just becomes absolutely nonsensical to the point where you think, well, something clearly happened. That was my general feeling. Something in Cairo happened. It clearly obsessed him for the rest of his life. No doubts about that. But let's face it, it obsessed him forever. And you think, well, why did he do such a bloody awful job of describing it? It's like, come on, are you trying to put people off? This is ridiculous. How do you expect us to believe this crap? And I've come to believe that everything that you read about that pivotal period is Crowley's best effort to define something which he glimpsed on the spring equinox, I'm led to believe, that literally it was beyond description. It literally blew his mind. He spent the rest of his life trying to rationalize it, and every new layer he piled on it. It's like, no, I've done this. It's like, whoa, you've buried the fucker. Look, it's dying.
It is a good story, though.
Well, of course, it's as Crowley hinted. To sell a good flipping messiah. You need a good backstory. And that's what it was. It was his sword in the stone, wasn't it? It's like, whoa, look at me, pull that out. But you see, ultimately, the only thing that matters is success. And if Crowley's system worked, because he himself described it as was 1,000,000 times better than the wheel, physics, mathematics, and cheese toast is. And yet we've had 100 years since it kept, well, actually more, haven't we? We've nearly 120.
Yeah.
God, what happened to the last 10 years? Anyway, that's kind of irrelevant. We've had 100, I mean, let's face it, we have the internet these days. A fat man dancing to a daft tune can attract 500 million viewers in 20 minutes. Crowley's got the best thing ever invented, and it's like, whoa, well, are you going to start it? Does it do anything? It's like it's just sat there, isn't it? And it's floppy at that end. And that's the problem. If it worked, nobody would give a shit if he made up the backstory. It's like, well, who cares? It's like, oh yeah, do that. Here we go. But it doesn't, and that's the problem. Sure. And what people, the kind of attraction that you felt for Crowley and that I felt for Crowley, you feel that raw heat coming from him, that whatever you want to describe, whatever system you ascribe to, you feel the power, and you try and get it by almost like making your own Lego Crowley. It's like, oh, this is my way of harnessing the power that I get from this man. And nobody's managed it up to now to get, no, they can't get the Thelema engine started. And you know, I mean, I've listened to a few podcasts actually since you introduced me to this whole thing, and I was listening to one let's just say an apologist for Crowley or a promoter of Crowley. I'm not quite sure how to phrase it.
There's a lot of them.
There are indeed a lot of them, and they're obviously rebranding Crowley as this kind of family-friendly rainbow icon. It's like, yeah, did a bit of magic, mysticism though. It's like, well, free love, everybody's a star. And I mean, that is so kind of cash-orientated, it's sickening. But one thing that got me about the subtle way the kind of establishment is morphing him into something that he just clearly wasn't, is I remember they got on he got on about saying, well, Crowley was only human, wasn't he? He was only human. It was just a bloke, and we all make mistakes. And I thought, well, actually, obviously I look back to the flipping pile of mistakes I've made in life.
Right.
And you buy into it. You buy into that shit. Yeah, I've been too hard on him. Then I pulled myself up and I said, yeah, but the vast majority of people learn from their experiences. They moderate their behavior. They change to become better people. Crowley turned bad behavior into a fucking art form. And each new instance, he wrote down, it's like, whoa, that's a ritual, that.
Yeah. Didn't he admit to raping somebody at knife point?
Yes, in his confessions, it was. I think he used a very oblique term. I think the impression he definitely left was that he got the better of a parlour maid at knife point. That was also confirmed in a kind of article he did some years later with someone called Burke, I believe his name was, in which he kind of elaborated on the story and gloated about it.
Yeah.
And you got the feeling that he told the story because of the way he used the alibi of the tobacconist. He was proud of getting out of it by his use of a fake alibi. Didn't give a fuck about the poor lass. And there you have again this like, whoa, that's not so white and sanitized as, as like that. That's really quite dangerous.
There's another individual that I don't think a lot of people really look at enough when we look at Crowley's life in total, and that is one of the founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, McGregorMathers. Now, why do you think the breakdown of the relationship between Mathers and Crowley, which did occur, in which Crowley actually took a lot of Mathers' work and published it himself? Mathers later.
Oh, he'll do that.
Mathers later sued him. Crowley's Goetia is literally Mathers' Goetia, except with an added couple of things and some squares from Abramelin, which shouldn't even be there. Liber 777 is basically something that Mathers did before Crowley did. But the reason I bring this up is that why is the breakdown of the relationship between Mathers and Crowley so important to Crowley's story?
Because in Crowley's world, there were secret chiefs, who covertly guided mankind's evolution, development, wherever you want. But they only spoke with one person on the planet, and that was the person with a right password. And at that time, Crowley believed Mathers was that person. In fact, I think in his diary, Crowley actually says that ultimately, whatever else, this is the point where the relationship was starting to crumble, Mathers was his only connection to the secret chiefs. And Crowley has a pathological need to contact the other side. And that is, and also I suspect that Mathers became a father figure to Crowley. It was exactly the same. He was this autocratic preacher, just like his father had been. And I feel that there was definitely that relationship. And of course, with Crowley's Oedipus complex, Mathers just had to go, which ultimately Crowley seems to have cut him. But the way, the final act in this act, allegedly Crowley travelled 8,000 miles to Ceylon, I believe, to get the story of a meeting between Mathers and Bennett, the monk guy that was quite prominent in the early the Golden Dawn stuff. He travelled 8,000 miles to hear a story from somebody else, and that to me is just how far out on a limb Crowley was. I mean, could he not have written to him? It just seems, to my mind, Crowley's belief system was just so out there. It beggars belief.
The breakdown between Crowley and Mathers, I think it's one of those things that not enough people talk about. It almost seems like almost everything that we attribute to being like the best of Crowley was actually as a consequence, besides the Book of Thoth. But it seems to be like as a consequence of the breakdown between Crowley and Mathers. Mathers pretended to be a Scotsman. Crowley pretended to be a Scotsman. Like, I think Crowley literally wanted to be Mathers. He would sign documents as McGregor and whatnot. It's a really, really strange thing. So when Mathers said he wanted nothing to do with Crowley and then eventually sued Crowley, I think that the hurt was so much that Crowley decided to take that hurt and in a way became very petty and use all of his resources to be better than Mathers in some very odd way. He wanted to outshine Mathers any way that he could. There's a very interesting part in your book where you talk about one of your friends that you emailed, who I believe is a psychologist, about Crowley's personality. Do you want to take us through that, Richard?
Yeah, she's got quite a bit of experience with this kind of thing, and she has an interest in Crowley. And I think we just got talking, and she said, well, has anybody actually done a kind of psychological profile on him? And I thought, well, no. Everybody's been either totally for him or totally against him on fairly subjective terms. And I thought, let's get her involved. And all right, the guy's dead. There's no getting around that. You can't, short of a flipping Ouija board, you're not going to be able to interview him. But as my friend noted, just look at what Crowley wrote. And I mean, she's virtually condemned him as somebody that's, how did she put it, mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Yeah. And I don't think that's, I mean, there's a list here of kind of, I mean, these are medical terms. I have to admit, I'm out of my depth here. I'd kind of quoted her without kind of much like, oh, that sounds bad. I mean, we've got craving narcissistic personality, paranoid narcissistic personality disorder, manipulative narcissistic person, and the list just goes on. And really, you don't need to be an expert to spot these traits in them. Okay, you take a confession, and oddly enough, another one of your guests, the Richard Kaczynski guy, the Perdurabo guy, fabulous biography, best biography by a mile. Probably when I was researching Bogus, I asked him, I said, look, can you think of a single instance anywhere where Crowley apologizes? Even a little bit, like, oh, yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Right.
And he could only offer one instance. I mean, all credit to him. It's like, okay, yeah. And the instance he gives is Crowley. It's in an unpublished notebook where Crowley kind of says, oh, I feel bad about not living up to Norman Mudd's request that I do more about Liberal. But other than that, I mean, you read Confessions. It is one of the greatest autobiographies ever written.
Otto Hagiography.
Oh, the autobiography of a saint. I mean, what balls to put that? 920 odd pages. He doesn't apologize once. Everything is somebody else's fault. Somebody fucked up. I behaved impeccably. They're all culpable all the way through. And if that man ain't in denial, then it's unrealistic to suggest other. I mean, you have to look at I don't know, is poetry, right? I don't know how familiar you are, but there were two particular works he described as love poetry. One was called Lear Sublime. You may be familiar with that. The other was quite a bit more substantial, called, I think, White Stains, Scented Garden, Perfume Garden, whatever you want to call it.
It was at Cambridge when he wrote those.
Indeed. Yeah. And you look at what turns Crowley on. I mean, you wouldn't write about that kind of stuff unless it were like, oh no, I'm just an academic interest. It's bollocks. He loved it. And you have to say that the kind of mind that revels, I'm not condemning anybody. You know, if you want to incorporate feces as a part of a healthy sexual relationship, fine. But there are very few people out there with that level of divergence from normal. And that all adds to just, whoa, there's one big bad fucking thing here, isn't there? And of course, the thing that really destroyed Crowley, he was rich. He had the money to indulge all of his fantasies. Well, until he blew it all and then limped to America to avoid the First World War, which I thought would a bit pathetic, really. But there you go.
What deep underlying motives do you think Crowley harbored his entire life? Did you just think that he wanted to be famous? Did he just want to be known? Did he want to be known as the most famous magician? What do you think and surmise? What deep-rooted motives do you think Crowley had for doing anything, really?
He just wanted to be loved.
Really?
And this goes back to the school. I mean, he described his childhood as, did he describe it as a boyhood in hell?
Yeah.
And he goes, I mean, Confessions is just full of this wailing, self-flipping, they were all picking on me all the time. Yep. And you think, is it possible that the reason Crowley encountered so much hostility is just he was a deeply unpleasant little brat? That's why people didn't like him. Because you have to remember that he came from this Plymouth Brethren set who believed that they were God's chosen elite, which really that echoes back to Aiwass and what Aiwass would tell Crowley. and that everybody else was just basically organic fuel for the Ascension Day barbecue.
Yeah. You just think that he wanted to be loved and accepted. You think that that's the main motivating factor to a lot of what he did?
I think that plays a large part. Because he was clever. Obviously, he was clever, far cleverer than most people. No question about that. And he wanted people to admire his cleverness. They wanted to like him for it. But I think his delivery was such that it just came across as this kind of, oh, what a bloody know-it-all. And I feel it was difficult to like. And of course, underneath it all, he knew he was bisexual at best at a time when that kind of thing really wasn't the way forward. I mean, we'd had the old Oscar Wilde thing, hadn't we, where they put him on a hamster wheel for a couple of years. And Crowley must have been acutely aware that of concealing that any kind of hint that aspect of him came out, and he was finished. It was a complex mix of loathing, wealth, and superiority, wasn't it? And I just think the more people failed to latch on to him, in his later magical aspirations, the more demanding and tyrannical he became. But nobody was listening, so it didn't matter.
They're listening now, though, Richard.
Exactly. That is the thing we are still talking about, because so few cults survive the death of their leader. But Cult Crowley, despite the best fucking efforts of the people who are supposed to be in charge of it, don't want to go there. We are still talking about it, and that's because, forget what Crowley did, said, you feel that raw power that people like you have felt, people like me, whenever you get close. And I feel that is the reason people buy for ridiculous sums of money letters, artifacts,
paintings.
Paintings. I mean, you're talking 5 figures. He was a bloody awful painter. But something about anything that he has touched, people want. And I believe that is in consequence of that day back in Cairo when he stuck his head right into the kind of womb of a new Aeon. And he came back saturated in those particles that stuck to everything. And I'm talking slightly figuratively here. And that's that power. And if he's touched something, you can feel it. That's his real power. He's just a force of nature.
This document itself, Richard, what changes if the Book of the Law is indeed a reconstructed fake by Aleister Crowley, that it took him a period of years and years to just make the foundations for this myth that many consider to be one of the most important new religious movements ever?
Well, they're fucked, aren't they? It's as simple as this. When you boil the whole edifice of Crowley down to a single little sentence, a little soundbite, you look at the history of his New World religion, the one that's 1,000 times better than everything. It has done nothing. I mean, let's say, for example, you saw on an internet forum somewhere, you saw an advert saying, whoa, yeah, here's a spell for, I don't know, sex, money, power, all the flipping chocolate fudge cake you could eat, yeah? Just do this. Send me $20. I'll send you the spell, yeah?
Yeah.
Woe and behold, 2 weeks later, you've got the damn thing and it works, yeah? You tell all your friends, they tell all their friends. Within 2 weeks, we'd all be gorging ourselves on lottery wins. But Crowley's system doesn't work. All it has generated in the last 100 years is the messy, embarrassing acrimony, backbiting that you see today. It's all Thelema has harvested is bad feeling. And you think, right, okay, it doesn't work. Crowley's system doesn't work. And you can flog a dead horse forever. It's not going to work. It's dead. Look, prod it. And I feel that in trashing Crowley's myth, I got to see behind to the original revelation that he went to great pains to bury because of its sexual nature, its homosexual nature, actually. But therein is the seed of Horus, not the literary stuff he piled on it. Because there's one thing in Liberal that is worth its weight in unicorn shit. And it's one sentence which says, I think it's the second chapter, verse 34, perhaps, abrogate are all rituals, all signs, all ordeals, all in the bin. And that could not be clearer. It is saying everything that you have worked with before, bin it. What that passage doesn't then go on to say is, except for the crap you'll write in the next 20 years. Doesn't. It says abrogate, everything is in the bin. And that is because Horus, the new Aeon, it's not some... See, Crowley didn't invent the new Aeon, didn't invent it. He noticed something that was happening, perhaps like Darwin, who noticed that the different beak things on birds. Right. And he deduced natural evolution from it. Crowley weren't quite as dedicated as Darwin. He got one brief look. But he drew enough from that to almost see the fractal quantum blueprint from which the universe works. And he poured a lot of intellectual stuff on something that essentially was dead simple. And, he came so close. He came so close. But he didn't quite get it.
Do you agree with John Simons, who is one of his biographers? John Simons actually wrote 3 books about Aleister Crowley, 3 biographies. But in it's his contention that Aleister Crowley lacked imagination.
Do you know, that is one point that I meant to note and I'd forgotten until this very moment. But I think you are absolutely spot on. Simmons said that most people can get off at reading a book or, I don't know, playing in a band, wherever, playing darts at the pub. Crowley had to be off his head on peyote, halfway up a Mexican mountain, shagging an ugly prostitute. And that reflects, it's almost like everything he does has to be super saturated before it gets through. Great point. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
There's been a ton of people backing away from Crowley due to some of the issues that we've talked about. He might have been a sociopath. Again, because Crowley's just written so much. Crowley's sexist, Crowley's racist, he's a product of his time. There's the squabbling back and forth about Crowley. But a lot of people, particularly younger magicians, they're backing away from the figure of Crowley. Do you still think Crowley's ideas are relevant?
With respect to what is happening in the world right now and has been happening probably for the last 20 years, Aleister Crowley is the most relevant person on the planet. Simple as that. Because the world is changing. There is no doubt. I don't think anyone can doubt. For millennia, our species has conformed to 2 gender types. You had male and you had all right, there were a few weirdos kind of swimming around in the middle, which were, oddballs. But pretty much you had male and female. In the last 20 years, our species has developed a whole new subset. It has never done that before. You have to look at that and say, whoa, Crowley, new Aeon of Horus, everything changes. And if you equate that with his system of eons, the tri-system of eons, it almost explains itself. Because if you imagine the Hebrew tree of life, are you familiar with that?
Very much so, unfortunately.
No, it's good. That works. That works, right. Okay, there's the universal tap, right? The stuff that spewed out from the Big Bang, right? Yeah. It's got 3 outlets. The first one flowed into Chokmah, right? Which was the Aeon of Isis, because Chokmah is the archetypal mother figure. During that period of time, we only understood the female mysteries. You had the divine female. They gave birth to new life. God spoke directly to them. Men were just servants. And then, that endured for about 60,000 years. And then about 10,000 years ago, probably a bored shepherd looking at his flock, he noticed that if you kept the goats with lots of dangly bits separate from the ones with only one dangly bit, they didn't have kids. And that one revelation changed a world in place for 60,000 years. Today we take very much for granted the fact that, male sperm reproduction, what's your problem? But then, can you imagine what a fucker that must have been to all the kind of priestesses who all of a sudden were like, oh God, we're not God's voice. We're just ovens. They shove it in, we bake it.
Right.
And that instigated the Aeon of Osiris, which was the phallic thing, which Crowley. But now we've got Horus, and Horus is the flow from the top one, Kether, straight down into Tiphareth, which is essentially consciousness. For the first time in 60,000 years, we can connect with the kind of fundamental stuff of existence directly rather than indirectly during sex magic, which was the generally accepted the best way, and I guess the evolutionary approved way of doing it, because at orgasm, that's the moment when you are totally just at one with, just at one with everything, I guess. But unfortunately, that's not the ideal place to be kind of like changing the universe, because oh fuck, I forgot to mention that. But now Horus has dawned, and we've got a whole new system. And I'll say that what Crowley noticed was, as a species, we seem to have undergone a species. It's like puberty. You see, before you get, as you get up to puberty, you become fascinated by kind of, whoa, what's girls? And then all of a sudden, during that transition, that world which was forbidden before, it was unobtainable, suddenly becomes accessible. It's like, whoa, that's what they were on about. And what we as a species have done is we have gone up an evolutionary notch. It's why you are getting this whole gender diversity thing. It's why you're getting the tearing the statues down thing. It's why you're getting the Me Too. There's a whole different flavor of creation flowing through people. It's changed course, and Crowley spotted that. Unfortunately, he took it all personally, and he said, oh no, this is mine, no, God's no, they just told me. And it's bollocks. This is for everybody. And I think that's where he went wrong. He tried to put a toll booth on it, really, didn't he, and say, oh no, you can get this, but it costs you $10. It's free to everybody.
Do you really think that that Crowley is just a very damaged individual? That this is why he had to package all this stuff up?
I cannot imagine. Today I was watching me squirrels out in the back garden, and I was trying to think of someone comparable today with what I perceive. And look, let's be honest here. I've done a lot of research into this guy. I've spoken to a lot of people who knew him, who were acquainted with him, and damaged. I mean, that doesn't even touch the sides. This guy was just. I mean, you go back to his childhood, for example. The cat incident. Are you familiar with that?
Very much so, yeah.
He'd heard that a cat had 9 lives, so he decided to test that theory out. And he described the process that he put that poor fucking cat through. as a scientific experiment.
Science.
Yeah, science. Like, oh, no, science. Sadism. Pure and simple. A lot of fledgling serial killers start by torturing animals. And in Crowley's case, I feel it's important to note that a cat is a feminine symbol. I mean, with respect to women, Crowley's, I mean, they talk about he was a product of his time. But not everybody in that period behaved as Crowley did. I mean, he said that he thought that women should be brought round every morning with the milk. Yeah. You think, whoa, that's evolved of you, mate. And this is all getting whitewashed out in this great reevaluation of Crowley as the flipping rainbow warrior, which is fair enough.
Why do you think that most people that are really big into the ideas of Crowley and Thelema, why do you think a lot of them take Crowley at his word, no matter what it is? I think a lot of confessions is probably not true.
It's a bloody good story, though.
Sure, it's a long one, but it's... Why do you think that there's just... I mean, some of it does match up to his diaries and whatnot, but some of it doesn't. Why do you think so many people are willing to take Crowley at his word?
Okay. For whatever reason, you've invested, or a person, not particularly, but a person has invested 10 years, 20 years in Crowley's system, yeah? They've bought his books, they've bought into the system, they've bored their mate shitless in the pub with what a great guy Crowley is, yeah?
Right.
Any suspicion that there's some kind of chicanery going on completely invalidates their egos. They've bet on the wrong horse. And that destroys everything they've believed for the last 10, 20 years. And the more you have invested in Crowley, be this financially, spiritually, whatever, the harder it is to concede that, whoa, yeah, hang about a minute, this I'm not sure about this at all. And that's why they're reluctant. It's why you don't get people discussing these discrepancies that kind of Bogus highlighted. They can't. And Crowley further hamstrung himself by decreeing that his writings let not such as a letter be changed. So you cannot deviate at all. And so anybody that comes in questioning the kind of divine mandate, it's too dangerous. It opens up too many potential ego-crushing moments. They can't back down. Again, if you want to look at a parallel, you look at fans of Michael Jackson. They will defend him to the hilt. They cannot hear a word wrong, despite a kind of increasing body of evidence that it's like, whoa, that's not good, is it? Same with Crowley. The more you have invested in Crowley, the more a Burke you'd feel if it just made it all up.
Should people just forget about how awful Crowley was and concentrate on his ideas and his texts? Like, is Thelema that is divorced from Crowley? Is that the answer?
I've thought about this one quite a bit today. I've thought about quite these questions. I was like, ooh, okay, I need to think about this.
Sorry to do this to you, Richard. I just want to say it is very obvious that you've done a lot of work, particularly Liber Vel Bogus. It's not just you throwing haymakers from the stands and just lobbing bombs. There's a lot of research that went into this stuff. So as far as Crowley is concerned, if Crowley is such a horrible individual, and if he's one of those guys that completely missed the point, why not just get rid of him and stick with the point?
Now, there you go. Now, that's that. All I can say on this point is, on April the 1st next year, I will be bringing out a book called 666 Sex and the New Aeon of Horus. Crowley discovered, allegedly, the onset of a new Aeon, and he wrote an awful lot about it. Okay? Forget everything he said. It's all crap. But he was right about the new Aeon. He just didn't do a very good job of describing it. And he couldn't, because he was describing a new language with old letters. But he tried. God help him, he tried. But what I'm saying is, if you forget the Cairo myth, let's say that Horus has dawned, it's actually a natural process, which would have happened if Crowley hadn't have spotted it or not. But what it does is it opens up access to the paranormal, because as you'll see, the paranormal is a function of global evolution, which is ideas kind of discussed in 666. And what's more important, and I think I can score over all of the contenders is here. Ultimately, I have a take on what Crowley said and what it means. That's the theory. This also comes with a practical means of testing that theory. Do you remember the Ouija board, right?
Oh, yes, very much so. I use one.
Oh, all right. Well, there you go. Right. You contact spirits via a planchette thing, yeah?
Correct. Yeah.
Using Crowley's ideas led me to a technique by which, and I know this is a very bold claim, it led me to a technique by which anybody, more or less, can provoke a paranormal experience.
Very cool.
And that is very cool. I'd come to an opinion that all paranormal experiences were different flavors of the same engine. Yeah, you plugged it in, and depending on the kind of person you were, the circumstances, it lit the Christmas tree up or it did something else. But they were all driven by the same engine. And I figured that if you could replicate the conditions which tend to cause a paranormal incident, seeing a ghost, seeing a UFO, wherever, then you could provoke one at will, as we can simulate other things now. As I was saying before, the 21st of June 2013 was the day in which I saw how you could do it. And the device that I've come up with, or the methodology I've come up with, which people are kind of jokingly referring to as the Horus toy, which it's not a bad title.
Horus toy.
The Horus toy, that's what they're calling it. Well, right. Yeah, and it's kind of, it works because it is, it's a sex magic, Assyrian sex magic is old hat. It is an upgraded version, a natural progression. It's like going from dial-up modem to a broadband connection, and it will provoke a paranormal experience to order. Very, very simple technique.
Crowley was somewhat against the idea of like spiritualism and whatnot. I wonder what he would have made of somebody using a Ouija board.
He had a pretty down idea on the kind of spiritualists. I believe he said that they kind of just let anything invade them and kind of run around willy-nilly.
Yeah, the Blavatsky and the Golden Dawn, they were not big on spiritualists.
For that kind of thing, you had to maintain control. But then again, you could argue that when Crowley got all kind of regimental and book based and like, whoa, I summon thee by this colour, this. Right. I mean, the thing that appears, I don't hear Crowley saying, well, I'd like to see your passport. I'm not convinced you are who you say you are. Have you got some kind of ID? It's the same. It's the same thing. It's you accept one, you reject another.
I'm interested to see that book, Richard. It sounds incredibly fascinating. I have to ask, because you're not the only one who has started to reassess Crowley over the last 30 years. Why do you think that this is happening? Why do you think people now, for a period of time, Crowley was it as far as ritual magic was concerned? Crowley was the guy that stood above everybody. But over the last 30 years, people are saying, not just academics, but magicians themselves. But why do you think that this is happening?
What, that he's fallen from grace?
Yeah.
He suggested that Thelema was going to be the new world religion. And unfortunately, social media beat him to it. And, well, You look at, historically speaking, you go back any historical point, any point, yeah, you look at how much time people spend worshipping their preferred brand of deity, yeah? I mean, you are an hour in church once a week, yeah. Now look at the time they spend worshipping social media. Social media is the new world religion. Simple as that. Also, people want these days that they have no time for hanging around. They want that there's a tremendous sense of instant gratification. They want it now. They don't want to pay for it. Everything has to be easy. And, well, Crowley's system still doesn't. I mean, the experts can't get Crowley's system to work. So you're like the flipping woke flakes out there, kind of neurotic that the cornflakes aren't warm enough. They don't have a hope in hell. And I feel that the attempts to kind of rebrand Crowley are just so lame. Really, I don't think they're going to go anywhere, because Crowley the man was a monster. Proper monster. Crowley the magician, his system doesn't work because he didn't understand what he'd seen. So let's take the bit he did understand, let's project it onto the new Aeon, let's interpret it as events that are happening on a world stage rather than that could have happened in Cairo 120 years ago. And say, well, look, does Crowley offer any insights how to marshal the new conditions that are clearly prevalent in our world? For instance, the fact that now we're migrating from a physical reality to a virtual reality, as indeed we are doing now, which is all part of the transition into Horus.
It's what he said he saw. Though, and that, not using the word virtual, but I see what you mean. Yeah,
a non-corporal.
Correct. I have to ask though, Richard, because it's all very well and good, but could we merely say that Crowley's new religion, the reception, all of the posturing of Egyptian gods and whatnot, and Hermetic dabblings are just an act of mythopoeia, something like The Lord of the Rings? Would that make things like a little bit better if people were just like, well, this was just something that Crowley later on wrote. We shouldn't be taking it literally, but there's some good ideas that came out of it. I mean, in the same way that J.R.R. Tolkien was saying something about fairies, we say that Crowley was actually saying something about something very different. Is this a healthier way of taking the Book of the Law and the holy books of Thelema?
Crowley saw something. He saw something that he didn't understand. He couldn't understand. No one could have understood it at that time. And the only way he had to describe it was to shuffle Mather's Egyptian system. The system, the Hermetic system, as you say, that had been ground into him. It's like if someone asked you to describe a new building complex on the edge of your city, you'd use words, English. The problem with the new Aeon is that everything's changed. Nothing, every structure that we perceive as being part of existence is crumbling, and it is crumbling right as we speak, right out of your door. Forget what Crowley said, because he didn't get it. Focus on the raw power, again, that's streaming out of this man, because he saw it. He saw it. He stuck his head right in there, and he saw something that is just changing our world. He just didn't describe it very well.
Is Thelema, as Crowley put it, more important than the wheel?
As presented right now, no, it isn't worth the price of a bus fare to Barnsley.
Poor Barnsley. Why are you beating up on Barnsley?
Oh, Barnsley's a cesspit. It's horrible.
Oh, jeez. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Not a problem. Barnsley's it's not that bad. It's just Barnsley. But if you forget Crowley's hyperbolic construct, then Thelema, as the new Aeon as the evolutionary gear shift that there is changing our planet, it is more important than the wheel, because it is dealing with the stuff that creates the thoughts, which create the people, which create the wheel. Crowley tapped in to the quantum soup there is at the very bottom of existence, where everything exists as an infinitely malleable potential. That's what he tapped into, and that is where you get the capacity for change in conformity with will.
Lovely. Wow. Richard, I got to thank you for coming on. This has been just an unbelievable program. Is there one final message that you'd like to share about Aleister Crowley, or do you think we covered it all?
How about I end? I've not sure whether to go into this, but if you wanted the cruelest, most cynical, ironic, paradoxical twist of fate you could ever want, I think I have it.
Go for it.
And this is something that I'm not going to be discussing until the kind of second part to Bogus, which is not due for a while. Okay, here goes. If you want to know how cruel fate can be, tell you a quick anecdote. In August 1903, Crowley went to Scotland, Strathpeffer, I believe, where he would ultimately meet Rose, elope, and that would start the whole reception thing off, right? While he was in Strathpeffer, and his confessions notes this, he spent a lot of time playing golf with a guy called Hill, who was a solicitor. Okay? Now, probably in the spirit which Crowley bemoaned to the foyer's authorities about the conspicuous absence of prostitution, Crowley seems to have banged on about the conspicuous absence of good quality typing paper. Right, that's it. I don't know what his motivation was. Perhaps he was just pulling this guy's leg. I do not know.
Right.
Anyway, he obviously left an impression, because when the solicitor guy Hill returned and went back to his job, one of his clients was a Scottish papermaker. And he obviously discussed this mad Englishman that couldn't get decent typing paper, and the idea stuck. And so the papermaker said, well, tell you what, let's do that. Let's make this bespoke London typing paper with, nice watermark on it. We'll sell it at 3 times what the normal people pay, because it's them London twits. And we'll do a new range, yeah? London standard typing paper. Okay. In November of 1905, when the paper became commercially available, the solicitor in question sent Crowley a ream of it with like, whoa, great idea. Look, we actually made the paper. Yeah. 5 years later, that very same ream of paper was used to write the Book of the Law. How about that for a fucker? If he'd kept his mouth closed, he could have written the fucking thing on anything else.
Jeez. That's a humdinger. My goodness. Richard, thank you so much for sharing that. Oh my gosh. Some people live very interesting lives, and I don't think either of us could argue that Crowley didn't live an interesting life.
Extraordinary life.
And I think you're right in some way. There is this fire there that for some of us, we can't not want to get close to it at some point.
Bingo.
Yeah, but some people seem to get burned by it, including the man himself.
Including the man himself.
Yeah, including the man himself. Richard, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much. Tell us, this isn't the only book you've written about Aleister Crowley. You've written Thelema Revisited. You've written An Unmagical Record. You have this new book coming out, 666, Sex and the New Aeon of Horus. Tell us a bit more about this book that's going to be coming out soon.
Bogus presents an alternative chronology for what really happened that was buried, suppressed, whatever. 666 says, right, this is what I think Crowley tapped into. This is how it's changing the world. And if you do this, then that happens. And you can call it what you want. You can spend the rest of your life explaining what just happened. But the fact is, you do this, and it happens again. What you make of it is entirely up to you, and that's basically the gist of 666.
Amazing. When is that going to be available, Richard?
1st of April next year.
That's wonderful. Where can people find your work and your stuff? Is there a website? Do you have a Facebook page? Are you on Twitter? Are you on Instagram? Where are you? Where can people find your stuff?
I tend to avoid any kind of interaction with the real world virtually at all costs.
Okay.
And over the last 10 years, I think everything I've ever written has gone out of print.
Oh, geez.
That's all going to change. I think
Okay.
Liber Bogus, I think you can still get a copy of that on Lulu, I think.
Yes,
I think
that's where I purchased. Yeah.
That's a nice, cheap version. Anybody can afford it. It's like, whoa, yeah. And you can see it. And certainly in the course of next year, I'm hoping that everything that I've written ever will be reprinted as a cheap, easy to obtain paperback book that you can read it rather than use as some kind of bloody idle sealed in bloody miler that you don't even open for fear of, losing the value of it, as people do with these first edition, limited edition. It's no, cheap paperback, read it.
That's wonderful. I will have links to all the places to get your work, Richard, and we look forward to April 1st of 2022 for the release of 666.
Well, I shall come back on its release. I shall send you a copy,
Oh.
and I shall be interested to see after. I would like to speak to you again after you've done the technique and you have opened a paranormal portal of your own.
I have very strange things happening with an Ouija board, even before this. It's one of my go-tos. So I'm very fascinated to see what you have written here. I will have links to all the places in which to find Richard's books. Those will be available at whatmagicisthis.com, as will other show notes for this episode. Also at whatmagicisthis.com, you'll find a link to my Twitter account, my Instagram account, as well as my Facebook account. I am not overly active on Instagram or Facebook, but I'm pretty active on Twitter. So if you like the Bird app and you want to give me a follow, head to whatmagicisthis.com, click on the little Twitter thing, and it'll take you right to my account. If you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, and perhaps they'll tell a friend, and then they'll tell a friend. That's how the whole word of mouth thing happens. I don't do a ton of marketing for my podcast, so word of mouth is probably the best way of sharing the love that is What Magic Is This podcast. If you enjoy the show, also, please leave a review for me, either on iTunes or Stitcher or any place that you can, or even just when somebody asks you, hey, how's that show? What magic is this? Leave a review vocally. But if on iTunes you want to leave a review for me, just write a couple of words. There's the whole star clicky thing. That's all well and good, but please write a few paragraphs about me. Paragraphs. Write a few sentences, not paragraphs. Write a few sentences about the show, telling the world how much you enjoy What Magic Is This. That would be greatly appreciated. People do read those reviews, and maybe I might have a new fan if they see your review and say, "Oh, this looks pretty good. I will check it out." If you think that I'm doing something pretty important with this podcast, or you just want to show your support in a way financially, well, guess what? Now you can. I have a Patreon account. That is patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to What Magic Is This and find any one of the Patreon links there. They're all over the place. What it is, $7 a month. It gets you exclusive content. It gives you access to a Discord server and other things like voting on what topics will be covered on the podcast, as well as what kind of content you want to see from me on Patreon. The content is great. I talk about deities and gods and instructional videos on how to make incense or set up your very own ancestral altar. And the audio episodes are just wonderful. People are saying, "Doug, I'm loving what you're putting out there. It's so great. Keep it up." And I will, as long as people sign up for the Patreon. It's my job now. It's what I do for a living. And it keeps me alive. literally. And I can't do that unless, people are joining the Patreon. So that's it. It's only $7 a month. It gives you access to so much stuff. And the Discord server is maybe one of the best places on the internet to get good advice about magic and book recommendations. And there's also a lot of pictures of people's pets, which is pretty sweet as well. I have to admit that I'm a sucker for a good pet picture. There's a lot of those in the Discord. But besides that, lots of great exclusive content produced by me. These aren't just like short episodes. These are full episodes of the podcast that I'm doing. They're hour long. And they're really awesome. So you want to see what I have to say about St. Cyprian? Patreon's the place you want to go. Do you want to see what I say about Baphomet? Patreon's the place you got to go. Well, maybe not see. If you want to hear other stuff you can see on there. I'm rambling a lot in these sign-outs recently. I really apologize for that, but I'm just going to keep on going. Why not, right? If you don't like the whole $7 a month thing, I get it. Sometimes it's not what you want to do, but you still want to show your support for What Magic Is This? Well, please head to whatmagicisthis.com. There are PayPal me links there. There you can donate anything from $5 to $10 to $20 to $2,000 to $5 million. I'm setting the bar at $5 million. If you want to give me $6 million, I say, nah, $5 million. I would be glad to get any of that. And it goes straight back into running the podcast that makes my hosting for both the website and the podcast. It pays for my internet, which is very expensive in Canada. I don't know if you know how expensive it is here. It is expensive, but each and every cent that goes into the PayPal runs the show. And it's always appreciated. But if you do that, you're not getting any of the exclusive content from the Patreon, unfortunately. So $7 a month, that's all I'm asking for the Patreon. And that can be found at patreon.com/whatmagicisthis. Otherwise, any and all things can be found at whatmagicisthis.com. Richard, thank you so much. I would hope that if sometime in the future that if I asked you to come back on the show, you would.
Delighted to.
Fantastic. So that's the show, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this. We went so many places. It's almost indescribable. And I hope we got a little bit more about Aleister Crowley. We got a different perspective on Aleister Crowley, not only the man, but his ideas. Until next time, I want you all to stay healthy, stay hopeful, and stay luminous. We have one more show left in the month of Crowley. And that's just going to be little old me talking about what I think about the great beast 666. So until then, be well. We'll talk to you soon, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.